In tonight's 60 Minutes classic, the controversial Reverend Al Sharpton. When we met him first back in 1993, the little-known Sharpton was, to most white New Yorkers, and a sizable number of black New Yorkers as well, little more than a noisy, pudgy exhibitionist and publicity seeker who could be counted on to show up bullhorn in hand at every racial incident in New York City. But like him or loathe him, Al Sharpton has now made a big leap from local and vocal activist to the big league of mainstream American politics. Nowhere was that made more apparent than at a Democratic primary presidential debate held this past February in Harlem's Apollo Theater.
Thank you.
Sharpton was the prime mover in bringing that debate to Harlem, and he was accorded the privilege of asking the first question.
What concrete steps would you make to deal with police brutality?
Was it your shining moment?
No, my shining moment was when the two men that pursued the nomination for president had to walk in the Apollo. It was just some gravy on the rice that I asked the first question.
And there was yet another special moment this month when Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had this to say about Al Sharpton.
A leader who has protested injustice with a passionate, unrelenting commitment to nonviolent action in the spirit and tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. And I am talking about your leader, our leader, the Reverend Al Sharpton.
But this kind of praise is far from unanimous. Sharpton still has his critics who see him in a totally different light. Let me read some things that are said about you even today. Impresario of hatred, demagogue, hate-monger, racist clown, belongs in the company of David Duke in the quarantine of American politics.
And I can show you some of those same titles written about Dr. King in the height of his career: communist, womanizer, plagiarizer, liar, Malcolm X. So I think that clearly anyone that fights battles of justice has to expect that they will be attacked and attacked unjustly.
To understand who Al Sharpton is, was, or possibly has become, you have to go back to the late 80s in New York, to a young woman named Tawana Brawley. I reminded Sharpton of those days and of an earlier 60 Minutes interview from 1993.
I give you our sister, Tawana Brawley.
The first time anybody outside New York heard of Al Sharpton was back in 1987. He was looking over the shoulder of a 16-year-old girl who claimed that 4 white men had raped her, smeared excrement on her, and carved the letters KKK on her chest.
My name is Tawana Brawley. I'm not a liar, and I'm not crazy.
But a grand jury disagreed. They found her allegations a hoax, and the Reverend Sharpton was blamed for irresponsibly exploiting Tawana Brawley to promote himself. Since the Brawley affair, Al Sharpton has been noisily promoting civil rights and promoting Al Sharpton, never far from lights, cameras, action.
No justice!
To many black New Yorkers, he's been their mouth for social change, for justice.
New Yorkers don't have to deal with racism.
To others, black and white, he's just been a mouth.
You can get out of here if you interrupt me one more time. That's what you can do.
As we said, New Yorkers have strong feelings about him. Things seem to happen to him. If they don't, he seeks them out. But he insists that his flamboyant behavior is necessary if he's to get attention for what he's after.
You got to remember, you're competing with Broadway lights, the Statue of Liberty. New Yorkers have seen it all. And you've got to be dramatic enough in New York to get your point heard. And you don't have to compete with that in other cities.
So what you've done is shape your personality, you think. Your hair, your voice, your attitude, your jogging suit for your audience, which is basically a black audience.
Well, if you were raised by James Brown, Jesse Jackson, and Don King, you would be very much like Al Sharpton.
Now who are you and who am I before God?
This so-called boy wonder from Brooklyn has been preaching since he was 4 years old. Born into a middle-class family, his father walked out when he was 10, forcing his mother, his sister, and Al onto welfare. That same year, he was 10, he was ordained a Pentecostal minister. By the time he was a teenager, Al Sharpton was leading demonstrations. This one for Jesse Jackson's Operation Breadbasket in 1971.
These dogs in Bensonhurst
In the summer of 1989, after a black teenager was shot and killed by a mob of whites, Sharpton led demonstrations through the streets of Bensonhurst that lasted for weeks. Frequently, they turned ugly. Sharpton was always the center of attention. One day, he became the target.
Get an ambulance! Call an ambulance!
A guy plunged through the crowd and stuck a knife in my chest. And at first, I didn't realize what happened. When I looked down, I saw this knife sticking out of my chest. And I grabbed it out, and when the air hit the wound, I fell down. And the next thing I know, I was in the back of a car being rushed to the hospital.
When he woke up after surgery, he asked to talk to his old mentor, Jesse Jackson. The two have known each other since Sharpton was a teenager.
One could see that something had happened, a kind of change in countenance. He knew he had had a brush with death. He had seen death face to face.
And it really came home to me that, you know, if you're going to die for something, you ought to make sure that it's more than some slogans and some loud talking, that you really get something done. And I made up in my mind that I was going to try to make a difference.
That was 7 years ago. Today, in trying to make that difference, Al Sharpton has, some say, undergone a transformation. He's gone mainstream. He's toned down that explosive rhetoric. He's lectured at Harvard and Yale. Gone are the bright orange jogging suits and the trademark chest medallion. He's slimmed down both his body and his hair. But he insists the changes are not calculated. It's just that he's gotten older.
I'm 45 years old, and as you get older, you dress older, you do your hair differently, and you do not act like someone in your early 30s because you're a middle-aged man. I'm matured. I've learned how to do what I do better.
Case in point, Amadou Diallo. When this unarmed West African immigrant was shot at 41 times and killed by New York City police officers, those officers were indicted. But when they were later acquitted of murder and New York City was bracing itself for the possibility of violent fallout from that verdict, Sharpton used the voice of reason, the voice of restraint.
Let not one brick be thrown, not one bottle be thrown, not one evidence of violence come from us.
And after that, when another man, Patrick Dorismond, was shot to death by police officers, again Sharpton acted quickly, moderately.
It is another unarmed man shot for no reason.
But his detractors, the stiffest among them the Republicans, remain unpersuaded. Why? Because in recent years, Al Sharpton has still been involved in many events that they say show the same behavior he exhibited on Tawana Brawley. And they haven't forgiven him for that one either.
You believe Tawana Brawley?
I believe Tawana Brawley.
And you have nothing to apologize for?
No.
Sharpton continues to support Tawana Brawley, and that continues to haunt him today, as does his refusal to apologize to a former prosecutor, Stephen Pagonis, whom he publicly accused of being involved in her rape. Pagonis sued Sharpton for libel, and he won, but Sharpton has yet to pay the $65,000 judgment and says he plans to appeal. And now Sharpton has filed his own defamation suit, this one against the Republican National Committee and its chairman, Jim Nicholson. Sharpton filed the suit after the chairman blamed him for inciting violence on 2 different occasions in which a total of 9 people died. But the Republican chairman still feels strongly about Sharpton.
He is a hate monger, an anti-Semite, and a racist.
Sharpton says they can call him what they want, but they can't accuse him of a crime. The courts will have to decide.
It is in the tradition of civil rights.
To this day, Sharpton is always fighting, and he's moved his fight downtown in Manhattan. He's opened a second office there, this one in New York's Empire State Building. Quite a contrast to his more primitive headquarters up in Harlem. That is where he still rallies every week and from where he draws a 6-figure income. But the Empire State Building is headquarters for his latest battle against corporate racism in advertising. And it's from this office that he planned this $500 a plate black tie affair, a radically different take from the last time we saw him in 1993.
If you'll think back to the piece that we did when you were talking about the black middle class, the black bourgeoisie, would you like to see that?
Sure.
At his weekly rally broadcast on radio.
I went to one of these highfalutin big Negro affairs. How are you, Reverend? Well, here's my card. Call me sometime. Call you about what? We got unemployment in Harlem, Bed-Stuy, Southside Chicago, West LA. Can you hire your kids at your corporation? Well, no. We got children with low self-esteem. Can you preach pride to them? Well, no. Well, call you about what? We're not impressed with your title. Let your actions speak for yourself.
You've joined the middle class. You've joined the black bourgeoisie.
I think maybe they've joined me. I'm still rallying every Saturday. We're still marching. In fact, many of what you would call, and I would call, the black middle class have become our big supporters when I've run for office. So I don't think that I've joined anybody. I think a lot more people have joined us.
Sharpton has run for political office on 3 occasions, twice for a U.S. Senate seat, once for mayor of New York. He lost all 3 primaries. But he did manage to capture the black vote, and that loyal support from the black community is a fact not lost on Democratic politicians. During his primary campaign, Bill Bradley visited Sharpton at his Harlem headquarters called the House of Justice, as did Hillary Clinton. Both were criticized for, quote, pandering to the likes of Sharpton. When it came time for Vice President Al Gore to make the pilgrimage, he took a much less visible path to Sharpton.
I did not meet with Reverend Sharpton publicly. I met with him privately, and I talked with him about some of the concerns that I have. I will not violate the privacy of that conversation.
Sharpton says the fact that the meeting with Gore was private is hardly significant.
If I had to meet with Gore in a subway stop midnight in the dark to get 2 presidential candidates for the first time to come to Harlem, I would have had the meeting there. The results speak for themselves.
You think the Republicans are going to use Al Sharpton as a wedge in the campaign in the fall?
I hope they do, because I already have my pictures of Governor Pataki and Governor Whitman and them ready, so I can show them how the Republicans were, quote, pandering to me a lot sooner than the Democrats were.
He has that photo with the governor of New Jersey, but no camera recorded that moment with the governor of New York.
They never attack Republicans when they meet with me. In fact, when Republicans meet with me, they're reaching out. When Democrats meet with me, they're pandering. I don't see the difference.
What is it that you want to be?
I want to be an activist. I want to be a minister in the truest sense of the word.
And then Reverend Sharpton told us what he's really after.
I want to be the bad black activist that becomes the mayor of New York City.
You'd really like to be the mayor of New York City?
Absolutely.
60 Minutes 2 will continue in a moment.